Hey everyone, I'm Mitch. I'm one of the pastors here, and you're watching episode 5 of a series of messages that we are calling This Is My Story. Let's get going.
Hey, how's everybody doing? Good. It's good to be with you tonight. Hey, I'm honestly not sure how this message is going to go for different people in the crowd. Here's the situation. For some of you, faith is just this exceptionally easy and simple thing. You just live by faith. It seems very natural to you. You trust in God. If that's who you are, the next 30 minutes aren't really for you. I'm glad that you're here. I want you to be part of our church, but the next 30 minutes are about something different. They're actually about people like me. I've never been a person for whom faith and belief and getting my mind around everything the scriptures teach has been easy or simple. For me, there have been multiple points in my life, some that became kind of deep valleys in my life that were marked with questions and wrestling and doubts and things that I could not figure out. You might think that because every week I stand up here and I teach from the Bible and I try to teach from it with conviction, that I don't have any trouble with anything that the Bible says, but you would be wrong about that assumption. I leaf through those pages and sometimes I come up against something and I'm like, that doesn't make sense to me. I don't understand it. I want it to make sense. And sometimes the issue is so large that it creates within me a level of doubt. And years ago, in one of the valley moments for me, I just kind of decided I was going to release the idea of having certainty about what I believe and instead embrace the idea of believing something enough that I could have conviction about it. That's just me. And the truth is, for those of you for whom faith is easy, where it's light, it just comes so naturally, there are some days when I'm jealous of you. I wish life was like that for me. I wish I could just read it and believe it and go on and that sort of thing. Some days I feel like that. Other days when I think about you, for whom faith is easy and simple and breezy, you frustrate me. And you frustrate me in part because when someone will ask you a question, you'll say something like, well, just have faith. And I'll be like, it doesn't work that way for me. And maybe more fearful for me, because I do care about other people embracing this faith, when I come across someone whose faith is very simple and it's just have faith, I actually have concern that some of the narrative out there about Christianity, that it can't withstand critical thinking or intellectual inquiry. I think it just gets reinforced among people. And I hate that. So over the last few weeks since Easter, we've been telling people's stories. For the most part, these have been stories of people who sit right next to you every weekend. And the gentleman who's going to tell his story today has been sitting next to you for years, literally at the Thursday night service. For most of the years that he sat here, he was an atheist. And he was attending our church with his wife. His name's Elliott, and Elliott's a good guy. Elliott grew up in Northwest Indiana. Elliott served in the Navy for a while. Elliott works for NIPSCO. Elliott's the father of two, wonderful little kids. Elliott's in many ways just like you and me, and I didn't meet Elliott for a long time after he had been attending here. He'll actually enjoy telling you that part of the story here in just a moment. But the thing about Elliott that I've grown to love since I've gotten to know him is that he's just a guy who's candid. He's a guy who's honest. He's a guy who will ask tough questions. He's a guy who has a great intellect, especially about science and history. He's a guy who you'd want to be friends with. He's a guy who's funny. And he's a guy, and this is important to me, who cares about other people. And he cared about other people long before he became a follower of Jesus. So, with that introduction, this is Elliott's story.
When Greg asked, I said no. I was very comfortable with that answer. And then you get it's going to help people. And it's really hard to say no to it's going to help people. So now I'm here doing this wildly uncomfortable thing in the hopes that I will help at least one person. So I think the place that I would start with my story is going to church when I was really young. If I went with my mom, nobody seemed to care that they were there. It was performative. It was, we're at church so that we can say we went to church so that we can go home and watch football. When I went with my dad's family, it was very different. It was aggressively zealotous. They all had an incredible emotion that I'd never figured out where it came from. On one side, I knew that there was a version of church where people were just there so that they could say they had been to church. And the other side, it was filled with people who seemed overly passionate and disingenuous about it. And if both sides were just performing, I could save myself that time and effort and not perform and not believe. But I was comfortable being there because I knew that it didn't matter. It was like being in a class you didn't care about. They talked the talk and never walked the walk. And it's easy to take somebody seriously when they act seriously, and it's easy to disregard somebody when they don't. And so it made it very easy for me to look at Christians and be like, I don't want anything to do with that group. I wasn't moving intentionally when I was young. That was not intentional movement. And so I didn't really actively think about that. I just, at some point, realized that I was more on the unbelief side than I was on the belief side. There are atheists who just don't believe in God. And then there are atheists who don't want you to believe in God. And I was definitely the first kind. Like, I just didn't believe. But I started moving towards the second kind. I started wanting to disabuse people of this notion. And I actually read the Bible a lot because, as it turns out, you can throw the Bible at a lot of Christians because they don't read it or try to understand it very much. And so deciding I didn't believe was really just reaching the conclusion of a place that I already was. It wasn't unchecking or checking a box. It was a path. Like I was led on a path there. I really wonder what it would have happened if I hadn't left that path. And a big part of the reason I didn't go with the more militant, anti-God Christianity was because of what I'm going to call a good Christian. You know, somebody who would debate me in good faith and who behaved the kind of way that the Bible said he should. Like if it wasn't for him, if it wasn't for that positive example, like I think that the argumentative part of me, the part that likes to debate, would have really dove in and really just, I think I would have calcified into the kind of person who wanted you to not believe anymore. I would have wanted to make those arguments. And I mean, he was my best friend in high school, and he was a good Christian. Eventually, I joined the Navy, and I served on a submarine, and there was a girl from back home who liked to call me a lot. We talked about if we had ever dated, would I go to church with her? And if I was going to be able to date this girl, you could get me to do anything. I'd go skydiving, I'd go to church, I'd, swim with the sharks, which meant that I was going to go to church. And I had no problem with that. Like, I did not mind being at church because it didn't have to mean anything. And eventually I got out of the Navy and we moved home to Northwest Indiana. And there was a church that she used to go to that she wanted to start going to again called Suncrest. And all in all, it was as good an experience as I could have had at church for somebody who didn't believe. And eventually, a series came out called Explore God, which had group meetings that you could do after, where you could talk through questions that you had. And Chelsea convinced me that we should go to the Is God Real one. She promised a pretty good experience. We would go, we would enjoy ourselves. We'd have a beer first just to feel a little bit loose and relaxed. And it was a terrible experience. I was judged. There was some harshness towards me. I got the sense that people were not a fan. And that was the last nail in the coffin. Until Greg found out. And Greg reached out and said, "Do you want to get some coffee sometime and talk about it?" Part of me, now solidly entrenched in this, I hit my dead end on the path to Jesus, was like, yeah, let's do this. Let's ask a pastor questions he can't answer. True to my belief, he couldn't answer most of my questions. And part of that felt good. And he also helped me realize that maybe the questions that mattered weren't the ones I was asking. But I left that meeting not believing. That didn't make the difference. But I found out maybe I wasn't actually on a dead-end path. And then Greg and I met again. And then he invited me to his men's group. And I was able to explore some of the questions, the ones that mattered. A lot of it was eye-opening, seeing people have a discourse about the way they felt and seeing how close it was to the way I felt. Being baptized, identifying as a Christian, it didn't magically make me feel happier or like life was easy now or things were smooth sailing. Like the same problems I had beforehand, I have now. You know, days that are hard are still hard. Days that were easy are still easy. I just have a radically different perspective. Days that are easy mean that maybe I have the bandwidth to help somebody with a hard day. Days that are hard means that maybe God has the bandwidth to help me out a little bit.
You know, I kind of wish you could hear 40-minute version or even the 4-hour version of Elliott's story. There's so much to it. He's a thoughtful guy when it comes to philosophical things and perspectives in life, and we really did have some great conversations. But it was kind of interesting to me when I was putting this together this week because Elliott's journey, thankfully to me, is one that went toward faith. But what we know in the world that we live in today, the neighborhoods that you live in, the workplaces that you go to, the schools that you attend, the general orientation of the population is the opposite direction. People who may have started as faith or had a childhood faith or were told they should believe by their parents, but it never really took for them, and they've moved in the opposite direction. And it's not just statistically that we know that. It's every day when I talk to people in my neighborhood to understand, man, people are on a journey. The journey might be wandering, it might be floating, it might be intentional, it might be seeking, but a lot of times it's not heading in the direction of faith. A few weeks ago, I was with the men's group that I lead on Saturday mornings, and it's just a group of 8 guys that are trying to figure out life, trying to figure out how to be dads of young kids. And leading up to Easter, I just had them read some of the Gospel of John, John's biography of his journey to the cross. And then after Easter, I had them read, the story of the resurrection. And we were reading John 20 one day, and I was just asking them for what hit them out of the passage. And one of the guys in my men's group, he said, that last 2 sentences of John chapter 20, after he had told the whole story of the life of Jesus, he said, it just hit me. This is what it says. It says, Jesus performed many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not recorded in this book. John later says, I imagine there wouldn't be enough space in the whole world if you tried to write down all the things that Jesus did. He says, but these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing, you may have life in his name. And the guy who was reflecting on that with me in my group a couple of weeks ago, he said it's almost as if we've read the story of John, we've encountered the story of Jesus. There's parts of it that are remarkable and miraculous, parts of it that are inspiring, parts of it that are intriguing, parts of it that will help me, and parts of it that are hard to believe. And it's almost as if he's turning after he's told you the story, and he's looking you in the eye, and he says, but these are written that you may believe. It feels to me like you have a decision to make about whether you're embracing this story or not. And if you've been around Suncrest, you know that it's a big deal to me. That in this room, all the time, I try to speak to those of you who are believers and those of you who aren't believers, those of you who are followers and those of you who aren't followers, those of you who are Christians and those of you who aren't Christians. And a lot of times within a message, I'll kind of weave those together and help people try to understand, well, this is the part, if you're a Christian, you kind of have to do this. If you're not a Christian, you don't have to do this. And so for the message, for the rest of our time today, talking about faith and not having faith, believing and not believing, I want to speak to those same two groups, but I actually want to speak to you very separately. And so if you're not a follower of Jesus, you of course can listen in on the next section of this message, but part of Elliott's story as he was describing it to me made me think, oh, Christians need to hear this. And so I just want you to listen to Elliott's story and reflect a little bit in your life about what he says here.
So the more I paid attention to the way Christians acted, the less convinced I was that they believed anything that they were listening to or saying. There's all these examples of terrible Christians, like people that you don't want to be around, people that you don't want to say like, yeah, we believe the same thing. They're acting on the beliefs that I say I have. Like it's embarrassing. There was a guy who, if he was supposed to be working, would never miss a service, but would never wake up for one. This dude went to church to not work. And you knew he didn't actually care because he would not wake up or take his free time to go to church. The only time he went is if he was supposed to be working. But if he was allowed to sleep or if he had a couple hours of free time, neither of those would compel him to go to church. And I remember just being frustrated with this guy and like, it made me really, it was just frustrating. Like to watch somebody use it like a get out of jail free card. Remember the flooding in Houston where like the mega churches wouldn't let people in, but Mattress Mac let people go sleep on like brand new mattresses that he was intending to sell and then couldn't. That man, I like. He is a good person. He happens to also be a Christian, and that's the kind of person that I'm a fan of. Like, he did the right thing at detriment to him because it helps people. You can see a lot of people who do things for ulterior motives or something. And that was, Chelsea never had an ulterior motive. Like, if somebody needed help, she wanted to help for them. She didn't care. It wasn't about recognition. It wasn't about prestige or anything like it wasn't like, I want people to see me do this. It was just, that person needs help and I want to help. And it's easy to want to be around people like that. Like having a Christian who not only talk the talk, but conceivably should be walking the walk, be open and non-judgmental, and just be there to answer questions. Like Greg didn't sit there and try to convert me. I didn't get any of the power of Christ compels you. It was just, you've got questions, I might have some answers. Let's talk. I'm here if you want to talk and, let's go. And it was just there was no pressure. I wasn't trying to be converted. I wasn't having an argument. It wasn't like I'm trying to prove him wrong, he's trying to prove me wrong. It was just a chance to converse openly with somebody who believed and, wanted to give me answers if he had them, or admit that he didn't have them if he didn't. He wasn't trying to be smarter than me. He wasn't trying to know more than he knew. He was just trying to explain the truth that he understood, and that's compelling. Letting somebody tell you what they believe without feeling like the pressure that they're trying to change your mind, that's something,
I was listening to Elliott's story, and it always intersects our own lives, right? So some of you know this past week, my grandmother passed away. She was 102 years old, lived a great life. She was ready to go. There's some sadness, but there's lots of joy. But on Tuesday morning, I had the great privilege of performing her funeral. And I have a bunch of cousins, first cousins, also grandchildren of my grandmother. And there's just it's a remarkably brilliant circle of people. And I could tell you the long list, but let me just tell you about one. I have a cousin who lives downtown Chicago, got his PhD from Northwestern University, that kind of guy. He's actually an inventor who's working in biomedical science. It's remarkable to me. And a few years ago, it actually might have been during the Explore God series, I knew that my cousin was identified as an atheist. And so I thought, hey, maybe I could just have dinner with him and try to understand how, at least how he thinks about atheism. Not that everyone thinks the same. And so I went downtown and we had a great dinner together. We both love our grandmother. It's not like we don't like each other, but I was just trying to understand. And I anticipated, because he's PhD, brilliant mind, that most of his questions would be intellectual and philosophical, and some of them were. But I continued to feel exactly what Elliott's describing here. He would just tell me about all the Christians that he's met, who don't even come close to living up to the values that they have. I was doing that funeral message Tuesday morning, and I thought, who's my audience? My audience is all of my cousins and my niece and nephews and maybe even my own kids who are sitting there who might be struggling with belief. And I just had to say out loud to everybody, listen, I know there's a lot of people who call themselves Christians, but you see them walk around and they're actually just like everybody else. They're arrogant and they're hard-headed and they're not all that compassionate. They sometimes even have an air of self-righteousness and a lack of humility. And then I wanted my family to see. The thing about my grandma is that her life actually looked like Christ. And it's so compelling. If you're the follower of Jesus, that your life actually looks like Christ. And the impact of our lives, if they do not look like Christ, is not nothing. It is kryptonite to people who might be interested in belief. And so, if you are a Christian, this is the part for the Christians. This is my question. How do you carry yourself? How do you carry yourself? Let me give you a few images to think about. I want you to think about literally where you live, your house right now, and maybe the 4 or 5 closest neighbors that live around you. Next door neighbor on one side, next door neighbor on the other, maybe across the street. How do you carry yourself with them? Set that one to the side. Think about your workplace, your work environment. The 4 or 5 people that you interact with the most, how do they see you live your life as a follower of Jesus? And maybe most critical, if you set that one off to the side for a second, are the people in your family. A lot of us have brothers or sisters or cousins or sons or daughters who we wish they believed what we believe. And I just promise you, they're watching us. And the question is, how do we carry ourselves in those settings? There's a passage in the Gospel of John where Jesus speaks to this. He says, by this, here's how people will know whether you're one of my disciples or not. How you love one another. This is the test, actually. This, of course, is what the whole world is about. How would people know? How would the world know? How would everyone know whether you're a disciple of Jesus or not? Here's how they would know. Do you love people? And when I ask you to picture your neighborhood, a neighbor on the left and on the right, the question I'm asking is, do those people know that you love them? They know it. You've done something for them. You've been there for them in a tough time. You've engaged them in conversation. They know you love them, right? And if you think about those 4 or 5 closest people at work, you have to work. You have to get stuff done. You have to accomplish goals together. You have to work as a team. And they know you're a follower of Jesus. Those 4 or 5, they know you love them, right? And your cousin or your brother or your son or your daughter who doesn't believe and struggles to believe. I'm just so wildly curious about what our posture is toward them. The one thing you've made sure of in their lives is that they know you love them, right? Not that you have the right answers. Not that you or a good person. Not any of that. And then I run into people. This is so wild to me. Think about your neighborhood. Like, yeah, Greg, but my neighbor's dog poops in my yard and they don't clean it up. And so somehow you're a follower of Jesus and you've justified a harsh response to a neighbor who actually just needs to know that you love them. Well, Greg, at work, come on, work's different, right? There's goals that we have to accomplish. You can't always be nice at work. You got to. Well, if you're a follower of Jesus and your workplace makes you act not like a follower of Jesus, then I think you should quit your job. I'm serious about this. It's how we live our lives that has a tremendous impact on the people who are around us. There's a passage in 1 Peter that says, to followers of Jesus, this is us, how you carry yourself. Always be prepared to give an answer to anyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. So here's what we're going to do in the room right now. Those of you who aren't followers of Jesus, you don't have to participate. In fact, please don't. It's not for you. For those of us who are followers of Jesus, I'm going to ask you to turn to one another in just a second. And for the next 20 seconds, I just want you to say to the other person, I want you to give them the reason for the hope that you have. You ready? Actually, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. Oh, shoo. Yeah, I just wanted to make you nervous for a little bit. That's all I wanted to do, actually, because I think, well, what would you say? You know what you'd say? You're always prepared to give the reason for the hope that you have. And you might think, I have to come up with some brilliant intellectual answer. You don't. Actually, here's how it should go. You should say, well, in my life, I was at a point in my life where this ugly thing was happening, and I ended up on my knees, and I prayed to God, and he answered my prayer. That's the reason for the hope that I have. I was in a place in my life where I was way off track. I knew I was doing the wrong things, and I actually kind of felt like God hated me, but then I understood, thank God for a Christian or a church who helped me see that God would forgive me of anything that I've done. And I felt that cleansing and a new life and a fresh start. And that's the reason for the hope that I have. We would always be prepared, Christians, to give the reason for the hope that we have. And of course, what does it say? Do this with gentleness and respect. And then, in a letter called Jude, it just says, hey, followers of Jesus, be merciful to those who doubt. When Elliott's telling this story, and he's kind of like, well, Greg didn't try to convert me. Listen, I wanted him to be converted. I don't try to hide that from anybody, but I don't think it comes across that way. And one of the reasons it doesn't come across that way is because I have a lot of mercy for people who doubt. And it's not about winning an argument. It's about appreciating that someone's on a journey somewhere, and if I can help them, I would love to help them. If I can answer a question, I can answer a question. If they ask me something I don't know, I just say, I don't know. Just because I'm merciful to those who doubt. And actually, I've seen many times, especially in families, where if you have a child who doubts, or a nephew who doubts, whatever, for some reason, followers of Jesus think the right approach to that is to kind of amp up, muscle up, educate themselves, and dive into a debate. And I'm always like, well, if they have questions, you should try to answer. But the posture is to be merciful to those who doubt. Follower of Jesus. I hope you're known for your love. I hope that you're always prepared to give an answer to the hope that you have. And I hope you'll be merciful to those who doubt. Now, can I speak to those of you in the room for a moment who aren't followers of Jesus? I know I go through that quickly, and you might even have trouble sometimes placing yourself on the dividing line between, am I a follower, am I not, am I kind of in the middle? That's okay. Actually, what you're going to hear next probably will help you think about it that way a little bit. And if you're not a follower of Jesus, one of the things I'm very clear on is that I don't have any authority in your life. The only posture I can take is to try to be helpful if you want some help. But I want you to listen to Elliott's story and his experience, and then I want to ask you a few questions yourself. Let's listen to this.
If it's a continuum, and there is I am absolutely certain in my belief, and there is I am absolutely certain in my unbelief, You don't go from here to here or from here to here instantly. And none of us starts here. We're somewhere in the middle, and we're moving. And so instead of me deciding that this was a decision that I was making or a side of a line that I was on, I allowed myself to exist in the gray space of I don't know. And existing in the gray space of I don't know takes a lot of the ego out of the question. It's a lot more about exploring and just seeing where you find yourself instead of being on one side or the other of an argument. This is hard to explain because it feels like whether or not you believe in God is a very binary choice. You believe in God, you don't believe in God. And as I came back, as I opened myself up to it, it really hit me that it wasn't a all or nothing proposition. It was a you can grow and learn and try to understand more, and you can move in a direction. And that's a healthy way to think about it. You don't have to sit down and immediately say, this is what I am. You can say, I'm open to learning. I'm open to exploring. I'm open to trying. And, hopefully you get something valuable out of that. Because it feels like there should be this moment of crystallization. Like where you're like, and maybe you think like that moment of crystallization is baptism. And once you're baptized, hey, there we go. I am solidly, unabashedly, definitively Christian. But I got baptized, and then I had days where I felt further than close. I got baptized, and then there were days where I wasn't a Christian again. Like I was like, you know what, I don't think I believe it anymore. I'm not hearing God right now. And you feel almost a little bit, it's like I got baptized, and I can't get baptized again. Like I can't, this wasn't the moment of confirmation that you kind of hope it would be. Maybe I tried to put too much on it, but then being baptized made me feel like, well, I can continue to be open to it. Like I got baptized and it didn't hurt. And so it doesn't hurt to maybe stray off the path and come back. I feel like stray off the path makes it sound like I went out and committed a mass murder spree. Oops, stop being Christian for a second. My bad, guys. You can kind of continue where you left off. You can have a bad day or a bad week or a bad month where you let yourself be distant from God. You can have that and then come back and none of your work's been undone. You're still able to wrestle with the big questions. You're able to try to be open to listening to God and seeing if he's trying to tell you anything.
So for those of you who aren't followers of Jesus, those of you who aren't Christians, this is my question for you. This is it right here. Yeah. What would shift your thinking? What would shift your thinking? Sometimes we think about this in terms of belief. Sometimes we think about it in terms of following Jesus. Sometimes we use the word Christian or not Christian. My question is, those of you who aren't followers of Jesus, who aren't Christians, what would shift your thinking? I'm gonna ask you kind of about three different categories, okay? The first is to say, well, actually, would nothing shift your thinking? One of the things that's fascinating to me about Elliott's story is he talks about moments where he could have calcified as someone who was not a believer in God. But remaining open to that journey and whatever God has, it became an important part of his story. And it's an important part, I think, of all of our stories. It's so interesting to me that a lot of times I'll talk to people who are 30, 40, 50 years old, and they'll talk about why they don't believe. And a lot of times they'll go back to well, I had this professor in college. And I'm like, that's the 19-year-old version of you. And maybe it's legitimate. Maybe it was, but you at least rethink the things you thought when you were 19 from time to time, right? To be open to something being different. And sometimes people will test me on this. I think Elliott actually asked me this. He's like, well, Greg, are you open to the idea that Christianity is wrong? Are you at least open to it? And I have one fundamental answer to that question. My answer is yes. I'm very open to that idea. You know how I told you before, it's not certainty for me, it's about conviction. And part of the idea of being a person of conviction is that I want to pursue what is true. I do believe that Christianity is true, but if I found out that it wasn't, if there was an overwhelming evidence or an epiphany for me to realize that Christianity wasn't true, the last thing I would want to do is hold on to Christianity. I think it's part of the reason why, in my experience in conversations, you don't have to be defensive about your faith. Because if I happen to be wrong, I want to know that I'm wrong, and I want to pursue what's right. And that posture of openness. To say, what could shift your thinking? I hope the answer isn't nothing. Sometimes when we talk about shifting our thinking, we actually need answers. This is for a category of people who appreciate logic and rational thinking and reason. And there's a certain number of questions that you have, and you feel like you need answers to those questions. I have a very common experience, which Elliott briefly described, where he had lots of questions for me, and I did not have all the answers for him. But then, I think you heard him say this. He said, but then Greg kind of helped me to reflect on the idea that maybe not all those questions are equally important, that some questions are more important than others. And if you're a thinking person, a reasoning, philosophically minded, intellectual person, I really want you to think about this. I think there's two fundamental questions, actually, that are above all others. I'll tell you the story real quick. There's a story in 2 Kings in the Bible. It's a very weird story where a prophet who is bald is getting made fun of for his baldness, and he's mad about it. And he calls on a bear to go maul the kids who are mocking him for his baldness. I think that was the first question Elliott asked me about. He's like, what about that one, Greg? I don't know. But what are the big questions? Here's my question. I ask this genuinely of you if you're not a follower of Jesus. Is it more likely or less likely that God exists? Not a firm yes or no, just is it more likely or less likely that there is a God? You know, from my perspective, obviously, I believe that there's a God. I think the creation of the world that we live in, the natural world that we live in, is actually overwhelming evidence for a creator. Nobody goes to Mount Rushmore and thinks, oh, that was an accident, right? Somebody looks at Mount Rushmore and the way that it's been designed and thinks, somebody did that. I love Rube Goldberg projects. You watch these things on YouTube where you should Google that later. It's where they line up, you got dominoes and then they hit a ball and then it turns on the water and then this swings over. And I always look at those and I'm like, nobody looks at that and thinks, oh, that was an accident. No, somebody thought about it, planned it out, set it up, and that's the way that our world works. To me, just to me, it's far more likely that there's a God than that there isn't. And if there is a God, then you want to ask the question, so who is he? Is one of the religions the right religion? Are they wrong? And so the question about Christianity is it more likely or less likely that Jesus actually rose from the dead? And this is really my conversation with Elliott. If you get to the place where you can embrace and trust that Jesus rose from the dead, you may not be able to get there, but if you land in that place, then the idea that I don't have an answer for you about the bear in 2 Kings, that's not the definitive question. The question is, what would cause you to shift your thinking? And then for some people, it's actually experiences that cause them to shift their thinking. It's not so much about belief as it is about trying to experience something from God, to feel something that's real, to have an answer to our prayers, to start to live in a way the scriptures teach and then see if it works. It's about our experiences. And so, if you're not a follower of Jesus, I want to share just a few things with you, and then I'll pray and we'll go. The first is this. The scriptures say, this is the Apostle Paul, if Christ has not been raised, then our preaching is useless, and so is your faith. According to the scriptures, and I think according to reason, if you'll think it out, all of Christianity rests on whether Jesus rose from the dead or not. If he did not rise from the dead, then Christianity is a farce. It's useless, according to Paul. If he did rise from the dead, then Jesus is the Son of God. And it's interesting to me, even as Paul describes this, he's trying to help people see that there is reason underneath this. This is what he says. He says, "For what I received, I passed on to you of first importance, that Christ died for our sins, according to the scriptures, that he was buried and raised on the third day, according to the scriptures, and that he appeared to Cephas," that's Peter, "and then to the 12. Now that's a big deal because history helps us here. Peter would eventually be a martyr. He would die for his faith. Actually, out of the 12 apostles, Judas betrayed Jesus, John died in exile, and the other 10 all died as martyrs for their faith. And you have to reason this out a little bit to say that's historically undeniable. And it's true sometimes that people will die for something they believe, but they incorrectly believe it. It's not true. But these are the guys who saw Jesus or didn't see Jesus. If you have your theories about how the resurrection isn't true and the body was stolen and the disciples, they just formed and hatched a plan, listen, there aren't 10 guys who are going to go and all die miserable deaths for something they know is a lie. Paul goes on. He says, after that, he appeared to more than 500 brothers and sisters at the same time, most of whom are still living. Paul's like, go ask them. Though some have fallen asleep. And then he appeared to James. You know who James is? James is the brother of Jesus. James is the one who, as his brother was getting popular and, gaining crowds, James was not a follower of his brother. He did not believe in the divinity of his brother. And then Jesus appeared to his brother after the resurrection. And James believed. These are people who really believed something and paid the prices for it. And last of all, Paul says, he appeared to me also. He said, I'll sign my name to it. The resurrection was real. And if you're a person who values reason, I want to invite you into a real exploration of whether the resurrection is real. If experience is a bigger deal for you, then I just have a prayer for you today. Could I ask you to pray this prayer? The prayer is, God, if you're real, make yourself real to me. And if you're someone who's not a follower of Jesus, but you're at least open to the idea that maybe this is real and you need to have an experience with it, I'm inviting you just to pray this prayer. God, if you're real, then make yourself real to me. If you'd pray that every day, you do it with some sincerity, just for the next 2 or 3 or 4 weeks, and you probably have something in your mind that you would like God to do to make it real to you, I would just say, step into the experience. Sometimes believing is tough for people. It's hard to be convinced, but it's interesting. Jesus always invited people to follow before he expected them to believe. Sometimes in churches today, we get this backwards, and we expect people to believe first and then start following. But Jesus is more like, no, just listen to my teaching. Start putting it into your life. See if it doesn't make sense. See if it doesn't work. Step into the experience of following and let it lead you to believe. And then with a little trepidation, I'm going to offer one more thing. Let me give you some context. Just last week, I sat down with my assistant. She's fantastic. She's been overwhelmed lately because for whatever reason in this season of our church, there's all kinds of people who want to have an appointment with me. There's stuff going on in life. There's challenges, all that sort of thing. And I say this to you sincerely. I understand why people would want to have the meeting with Greg. I'm the one who's up here and the one and the talk. Most of our pastoral staff is way better at that than I am. And so we actually looked at the calendar and we're like, you know what? I can't take another appointment until August. And then I texted her today and I said, hey, just so you know, this weekend I'm going to try to take a lot of appointments. So here's my offer. For people who are not Christians and would talk about it, guess where I met with Elliott? Panera, right? So we got this set up. Text 94,000, text the word Panera. My assistant will set up for you and I to meet at Starbucks. It will be awesome. I'm only kidding. For me, it's the kind of church we are. I would prioritize people who aren't followers of Jesus. I would sacrifice time, conversation for those of you who aren't followers of Jesus, even above those of you who are, because I would love to have a faith conversation with you. So if you're a Christian, you can't text this in. But if you are not a Christian and you would be open to a conversation about faith, text Panera. If you can do it during the day, we'll meet at Panera. Can't do it during the day, then you're gonna have to wait until I put my kids in bed, but I'll come out at 8:30 and I'll have a beer with you. I didn't say text off square. Yeah, I don't know what to have you text. But we'll just have a good conversation about faith. I would love to do that with you.
One thing that's super important to us here at Suncrest is to be known for being for the region, to be for Northwest Indiana. And one of the ways that we're trying to do that this year is by collecting 50,000 pairs of socks and underwear for one of our community partners called Sojourner Truth House. They serve women and children in need throughout our community who are needing help to just get their legs under them and to start life off in really great ways. And one of their greatest needs is socks and underwear. Would you consider donating some socks and underwear to Suncrest for our 50,000 challenge this year? In fact, specifically, would you consider doing it in the next week to week and a half? Right around Mother's Day. You see, because this is serving women and children, we want to be someone who can partner with this community and say, we want to help a mom make a difference in her household for her kids with something that oftentimes we can overlook, but can make a huge impact to the dignity and care of women and children in our community. So you can find our Amazon wish list and you can send those directly to us from Amazon. But I want to challenge you, be generous. Help us raise 50,000 pairs of socks and underwear in the 50,000 challenge this year.
Narrow as the as a sacrifice. Oh, use me how you want to, God. Have your throne within my heart. I hear you call. I am available. I say yes, Lord. I am available.
Every week, we pause everything we do, both in person and on demand, to focus on the love of Jesus through a time called communion. Communion is something that Jesus asked his followers to remember his love and his sacrifice on the cross. So in person, we take bread and juice, but on demand, go ahead and take whatever food and drink you have available to remember Jesus' body, which was broken, and his blood, which was poured out for us, so that we might know what real love and real sacrifice look like. If you're watching this and you're not quite sure you believe that, or you're just checking this out, listen, I want to invite you to just pause. Pause, reflect on what you've heard so far, and be open to the idea that there is a God who wants to get to know you, who wants to show you what love looks like, wants to show you what the best way of living could be. I'm going to put a timer and some scripture on the screen for all of us to participate in that however you see fit. If you enjoyed this video, go ahead and hit the like button. If you think someone in your social media feeds, or maybe in just your contact feeds, needs to hear what we talked about today, go ahead and hit the share button on YouTube or Facebook. And if you want to see more content from Suncrest Church, hit the subscribe button on YouTube, because we are putting out stuff every week that's aimed at helping you integrate faith and life. Listen, it's our hope that you experience change that comes from contributing by serving, cultivating a trust relationship with God, connecting in life-changing relationships, and caring about lost people. We'll see you guys next time, and I hope you experience change in your life.